And we start this hour with breaking news. You are taking a live look at Capitol Hill, where House Speaker Nancy Pelosi is expected to announce a formal impeachment inquiry into President Trump. That announcement is expected at any moment. We'll bring it to you live as soon as it begins. Our team of reporters are standing by as we await the House Speaker. Eamon, Javers traveling with the president live outside the UN. But we kick it off with Ylan Moy in our D.C. newsroom. Ylan.
Melissa, a moment of truth. That is how the speaker has been describing her decision to Democratic lawmakers, and she is speaking right now.
Last Tuesday, we observed the anniversary of the adoption of the Constitution on September 17th. Sadly, on that day, the Intelligence Community Inspector General formally notified the Congress that the administration was forbidding him from turning over a whistleblower complaint on Constitution Day. This is a violation of law. Shortly thereafter, press reports began to break of a phone call by the President of the United States calling upon a foreign power to intervene in his election. This is a breach of his constitutional responsibilities. The facts are these. The Intelligence Community Inspector General, who was appointed by President Trump, determined that the complaint is both of urgent concern and credible. And its disclosure, he went on to say, relates to one of the most significant and important of the Director of National Intelligence's responsibility to the American people. On Thursday, the Inspector General testified before the House Intelligence Committee, stating that the acting Director of National Intelligence blocked him from disclosing the whistleblower complaint. This is a violation of law. The law is unequivocal. The DNI staff, it says the DNI, Director of National Intelligence, shall provide Congress the full whistleblower complaint. For more than 25 years, I've served on the Intelligence Committee as a member, as the ranking member, as part of the Gang of Four, even before I was in the leadership. I was there when we created the Office of the Director of National Intelligence. That did not exist before 2004. I was there even earlier in the 90s when we wrote the whistleblower laws and continue to write them to improve them to ensure the security of our intelligence and the safety of our whistleblowers. I know what their purpose was, and we proceeded with balance and caution as we wrote the laws. I can say with authority the Trump administration's actions undermine both our national security and our intelligence and our protections of the whistleblowers, more than both. This Thursday, the acting DNI will appear before the House Intelligence Committee. At that time, he must turn over the whistleblower's full complaint to the committee. He will have to choose whether to break the law or honor his responsibility to the Constitution. On the final day of the Constitutional Convention in 1787, when our Constitution was adopted, Americans gathered on the steps of Independence Hall to await the news of the government our founders had crafted. They asked Benjamin Franklin, "What do we have, a republic or a monarchy?" Franklin replied, "A republic if you can keep it." Our responsibility is to keep it. Our republic endures because of the wisdom of our Constitution, enshrined in three co-equal branches of government, serving as checks and balances on each other. The actions taken to date by the President have seriously violated the Constitution, especially when the President says, Article 2 says I can do whatever I want. For the past several months, we have been investigating in our committees and litigating in the courts, so the House can gather all the relevant facts and consider whether to exercise its full Article 1 powers, including a constitutional power of the utmost gravity, approval of articles of impeachment. And this week, the President has admitted to asking the President of Ukraine to take actions which would benefit him politically. The actions of the Trump presidency revealed the dishonorable fact of the President's betrayal of his oath of office, betrayal of our national security, and betrayal of the integrity of our elections. Therefore, today, I'm announcing the House of Representatives moving forward with an official impeachment inquiry. I'm directing our 6 committees to proceed with their investigations under that umbrella of impeachment inquiry. The president must be held accountable. No one is above the law. Getting back to our founders, in the darkest days of the American Revolution, Thomas Paine wrote, "The times have found us. The times found them to fight for and establish our democracy. The times have found us today, not to place ourselves in the same category of greatness as our founders, but to place us in the urgency of protecting and defending our Constitution from all enemies, foreign and domestic." In the words of Ben Franklin, to keep our republic. I thank our chairman, Chairman Nadler, Chairman Nadler of Judiciary, Chairman Schiff of Intelligence, Chairman Engel of Foreign Affairs, Chairman Cummings of Oversight, and Chairman Cummings I've been in touch with constantly. He's a master of so much, but including inspectors general and whistleblowers. Congresswoman Richie Neal of the Ways and Means Committee, Congresswoman Maxine Waters of the Foreign Financial Services Committee. And I commend all of our members, our colleagues, for their thoughtful approach to all of this, for their careful statements. God bless them, and God bless America. Thank you all.
Madam Speaker, never before. We've been listening to House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, who has called for an official, formal impeachment inquiry into President Trump. She said that President Trump's call with the president of Ukraine was unconstitutional. Let's get to Ylan Moy in Washington, D.C. with the implications of this all. Ylan.
Melissa, I thought it was notable that she framed this as an issue of national security. She called it a violation of law and a breach of constitutional responsibilities. This is a moment the Speaker had tried to avoid for a very long time. She has said that impeachment could be divisive within the country, within her party, and that she would not act until the call was simply unavoidable and the evidence, to her mind, inevitable. So this is a sign now, with 170 at least House Democrats behind her, with all her committee chairmen behind her now, supporting this move toward an impeachment inquiry, that she feels that she can take this step with political support behind her and for this movement. But I think it is really important to point out what she is not doing. She is not calling for articles of impeachment. She is calling for all 6 committees to do an investigation to determine whether articles of impeachment might be necessary, if they should move forward with the steps. So this is still a preliminary stage, but an important acknowledgement by the Speaker and by Democrats that they want to ratchet up the level of investigation.
All right, Ylan, thank you. Ylan Moy in our D.C. bureau. Let's get to Eamon Javers, who is traveling with the president. He is live for us outside the United Nations, where President Trump spoke earlier today and also talked about releasing the full unredacted transcript of that call with the Ukrainian president. Eamon.
Yeah, Melissa, and after we heard from the Speaker of the House just there, now it's clear that the battle lines have been drawn. This impeachment fight is going to be about the content of that phone call the president had with the Ukrainian president, and also all of his conduct surrounding that, the relationship between the president and the Ukrainians. Did the president, as Nancy Pelosi just said, inappropriately and even illegally and unconstitutionally request help in his political campaign from a foreign leader? Or, as the president has been saying today, did he simply request that the Ukrainians participate in the overall democratic process here? These are two very starkly different versions of the same set of events. The president today tweeting out just within the past 2 hours that he is going to release the transcript of his conversation with the Ukrainian president. That's going to come tomorrow after we've just had this announcement from Nancy Pelosi. So presumably the president already knows what's in that transcript. He's been saying throughout the day today that there's nothing inappropriate in that call. By releasing that, the president is bowing to some political pressure here, Melissa, because some members of his administration had been suggesting that he wasn't going to do it because it would set what they called a bad precedent for other world leaders if they could suspect that their conversations would be transcribed and then released to the public eventually at some point in the future. They said they didn't want to do that. Now the president's saying he will do it, Melissa. So we'll get a look at that tomorrow. Unclear exactly how much detail beyond that, but more is coming tomorrow, and that's where the battle is going to be.
All right, Eamon, thank you, Eamon Javers. In the meantime, we do have a tweet from President Trump just 1 minute ago. He tweets, "Such an important day at the United Nations, so much work and so much success, and the Democrats purposely had to ruin and demean it with more breaking news, witch hunt garbage. So bad for our country." So that is a tweet that came out just about a minute ago. So on the heels of House Speaker Nancy Pelosi calling for a formal inquiry into impeachment, we usually don't talk about politics on this show, for sure, except that in today's session, we saw the markets really being dictated by every single headline. If we can show this chart, we have exactly when the markets started going down, and that started with the tough talk on China coming from the president out of the UN. Then the news report that Pelosi will have an announcement later today regarding impeachment. We saw the market take a leg lower. The president saying, "I'm going to release a transcript." The markets pared its losses in half. And then we sort of faded into the day when we knew that Pelosi was going to continue with this 5 p.m. announcement, which we just heard. So what does this all mean when we're being held captive by these headlines? And let's sort of try and game out, what does this mean for the markets if the House goes down this road?
Well, I got to believe, and again, we're not MSNBC, we're not a political show,
Yes.
but we'll game it out a little bit to answer your question and say this. I mean, so much of the market is waiting for this deal with the Chinese. If you're in China right now, with what we've just heard, are you now quick to make a deal with the United States based on this? My sense is no, but that's been something I've been saying for quite some time. So I think this pushes any deal with China out into the future. The flip side of that is the president now maybe feeling that he's somewhat backed into a corner? Is he more quick, or is his instincts now to make a deal with the Chinese that might be not as advantageous as one would have been? So there's a number of ways to play this out, but I can't for the life of me come up with a conclusion that this is somehow market positive. It's not.
Karen, where do you stand?
I think it's not really going to make a difference. I think that, one of the effects of being as divided as we are as a nation is that I don't think an impeachment is going to change anyone's mind who is a Trump supporter to continue to vote for Trump and who is a Trump hater to continue to hate Trump. I do think it's going to cause greater gridlock than we already have. We got pretty bad gridlock already. So I don't really think there wasn't an infrastructure bill that was about to happen that now won't. So I don't know that will matter. I agree that I feel like China is still the big issue. And then secondary is the Fed and economies around the world. I feel like that's more important than this news today, unless for some reason there is a growing sentiment among senators to get on board, which I don't see that happening. Unless that happens, I think this goes nowhere.
Cowen Research came out today and said that their base case scenario is that the House votes for impeachment, but that it goes no further than that. At the same time, at minimum, I mean, Karen had mentioned sort of the gridlock that could be intensified. We still have another trade deal that Congress needs to approve, USMCA. Does that mean that gets delayed? And is that bad for, I mean, there are so many different implications in terms of the end of legislating here because of the House dealing with impeachment.
Yeah, so if we look back to when Bill Clinton was impeached, and if you go from start to finish, there was a lot of volatility initially, but eventually the Senate didn't convict. The S&P was up like 28% over the course of that time frame. I don't know that history is going to repeat itself, but what I can say is that there's just a lot of political uncertainty out there right now, and that is typically a contrarian indicator, right? And if you are trading based off of the latest trade or political headline, the market's going to chew you up and spit you out. So you really need to figure out whether or not you believe this bull market's still intact. And if you think it's still intact, you use these volatile moments as opportunities to add to positions.
And that's what you would be doing?
That's what we'd be doing right now.
So we're here to respond to markets' response to threats of political influence or politics on the market. And we've been through a handful of these cycles during the Trump administration. What I would say about today is that this is clearly an escalation of a new political threat that has not been, I don't think, measured by the market to this point. I don't think impeachment was at all put on a market risk factor, except for when we started into the Mueller investigation. Think about what the Mueller investigation during a couple of its early spikes of momentum actually did for the market. It was detrimental for the market in the short term. It was not something that we ultimately saw play out in terms of any material impact. But to the fact that there only have been, and again, we moved towards impeachment today. We didn't announce it. The articles have not been prepared. But there's been only 3 other impeachment hearings in history. So the fact that you could raise this specter at a time when German EFO this morning was just off of just off of essentially market crisis lows. Japan's manufacturing sector sunk deeper into contraction. You have 30% of the European economy, which is Germany, that's effectively under siege right now from a global trade war. And you had consumer confidence that this morning in our country, which we all know and we talk about every night on this show, how the consumer is really the story. And yet you're looking at least expectations factors that in this report this morning were only the second lowest print since before the Trump presidency.
The markets have been able to shrug off all sorts of political uncertainty in the past, but when the backdrop of the economy was stronger. And now the difference is that it is weakening. We got to get to Eamon Javers here. We've got more from President Trump. Eamon, what's the latest?
Yeah, Melissa, the president is venting some of his frustrations over Twitter in real time here. Just in the past couple of minutes, the president tweeting Pelosi, Nadler, Schiff, and of course, Maxine Waters. Can you believe this? An extremely frustrated President Trump here singling out some of the Democratic leaders who will be spearheading this impeachment inquiry effort that Nancy Pelosi just announced. These are people that the president views very much as his political enemies, and now they'll be in charge in some ways of determining what his political fate is here. Another tweet from the president just within the past 2 minutes saying they never even saw the transcript of the call, a total witch hunt. Here, the president returning to some of the rhetoric that he used successfully to deflect the Mueller investigation into alleged Russian collusion between the president of the United States and the government of Russia. That inquiry ultimately didn't amount to anything in terms of political consequence for the president. In fact, if you recall, Melissa, Robert Mueller testified on Capitol Hill on July 24th. It was July 25th. The very next day that the president allegedly made this call, or did make this call to the president of the Ukraine, and then allegedly brought up this Joe Biden investigation that he wanted to see, Melissa. So just one day after Mueller's testimony on Capitol Hill, this series of events began, which has now led us to the moment that we're in today.
All right. Eamon, thank you for keeping us posted. Eamon Javers in front of the UN in New York City here. Guy Adami,
yes.
Let's say we go down the route of impeachment. What are some of the other implications here for the president and for an agenda for the markets?
What are the implications? It's fascinating. You know, I brought up the U.S.-China trade deal. I think that's first and foremost. And then the market will say, well, will the Federal Reserve have our back? And I've said for a while, I think it's foolish, in my opinion, to think that the Fed is somehow going to backstop this market. So I think we find ourselves with the VIX. It did close at 17 today, which was a significant move from yesterday's close. In my opinion, it's still too cheap in this environment. But I have to tell you, it's something I've been saying for months now, and for months it's been incorrect. Maybe this is the final straw. I have no idea. Maybe we read the transcripts tomorrow and this all goes away. But I'm hard-pressed to believe this is somehow market positive.
Let's say it doesn't impact President Trump himself in terms of being impeached, because I think that most people at this point in time would say that would be a sort of a long-off prospect. At the same time, does this wound the president going into the 2020 election cycle and make the chances of a Democrat winning greater, which would be probably seen, according to consensus views, for what that's worth, as market negative?
I mean, think of what we got on November 9th and from 2016, and how people were surprised at the impact of the clean sweep across, 3 legislative branches, but effectively what it really meant for just a total change in tide. It didn't matter whether you thought certain things were going to get done. Back to the markets today, you had an extraordinarily strong 2-year note auction. You had a 10-year that closed down at 164. We were at 190, last week. We're back at this move lower in yields. For everybody that said we were hit the low in yields, a lot of people are scratching their heads once again, because the economic dynamics here, and Guy's right. I mean, it doesn't matter what the Fed does here. This is not about monetary policy. There's nothing monetary policy can do for the rest of the world. You've seen every central bank begin to question that. So this is about either fiscal policy or truly getting on with it. And right now, it doesn't look like we're getting on with it.